We are on page Chaf Aleph, Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, 22a. Yesterday we learned about three cases where we have an argument between the opinion of the rabbis in Rabbi Yehuda that a person was tameh with a double tumah, two types of tumah. One is called keri, and the other was a 7-day tumah. Different types. There's either nida or zav, but it's basically you have two types of tumah. And the question is, should the person go to mikvah? And does it help? Does he need to go to mikvah if he wants to learn Torah, or because he's anyway tameh, is he not obligated to go to the mikvah for the keri because he's anyway not going to become purified? And the Gemara mentioned two opinions. We have the opinion of the rabbis that he should go to mikvah. Rabbi Yehuda says he doesn't have to go to the mikvah, and the Gemara seemed to it seemed that this Mishnah implied that Rabbi Yehuda says only in this type of case that a person doesn't go to mikvah, but in a regular case where a person is just tameh with keri, with one type of tumah, in that case everyone would agree that he has to go to the mikvah. And the Gemara seemed to be convinced that Rabbi Yehuda follows this takana of Ezra. This was something that we were debating. Does Rabbi Yehuda agree with this decree of Ezra, or does he totally disregard it? And this Mishnah seemed to prove, because they one of the cases, the fact that it mentions a case, it seems to be mentioning it to tell you that only in this type of case where you have two types of tumah, there Rabbi Yehuda says you don't have to go to mikvah, but it implies if it was one, then you would have to go to the mikvah. That means Rabbi Yehuda agrees with this decree of Ezra. And the Gemara understands it, that Rabbi Yehuda must be saying that you need to be maharher, you need to think the blessings, you don't recite them with your mouth. But then the Gemara wasn't satisfied with that, because the Gemara said, but we have a proof from another place that Rabbi Yehuda says you have to actually say the words, even about keri. And it brings a brisa where Balkari doesn't have water to be toivel, so he's stuck. He doesn't have. He can't go to mikvah. And the first opinion was that he just does the biblical obligations with with thought, and that's the words of Rabbi Meir. And the second opinion was Rabbi Yehuda, and that's the opinion, the same Rabbi Yehuda of our Mishnah, that what does he do? He says it with his lips. So we have a proof that Rabbi Yehuda does allow recital, physical recital, not just thinking it. And so the Gemara is trying to figure out, so then does he really agree with this takana? How does he, does he really follow through? Does he believe that it's prohibited to study Torah? Because here he's telling you to say the words of the prayers and the blessings. So the Gemara explains that Rabbi Yehuda has a certain leniency. And the leniency is that it's when it comes to the laws of Derech Eretz, that is allowed to be studied. And these laws, these prayers are similar to like laws of Derech Eretz, laws of respect. So that's the leniency of Rabbi Yehuda. And then it brought a whole brisa with different opinions as to the law of a Balkari. What is he allowed to study? And there were different opinions. What a person would be allowed to study if they don't have water, they didn't go to the mikvah. What could they study? And we also mentioned that the other types of tumah have no such decree, only these type of tumah. And the Gemara, at least the commentary, Rashi explained the reason. Well, I mean, the Gemara really said it. The reason for the difference, Rashi develops the thought, but really the Gemara says it pretty clearly, that it's all about awe and fear of heaven. That's what it all boils down to. And if you became tamei against your will, or you have no, there's no, you're tamei, naturally. So therefore, you have no problem studying Torah. But if it came from your own frivolity, then you would need to go to the mikvah, and you'd be prohibited from studying Torah, because Torah necessitates the Torah needs to have awe and fear and trembling and so on. And therefore, if a person is a Baal Keri, he wouldn't be allowed to study Torah. So this really gives us a little picture, a little explanation of what is the reason. Why does a Baal Keri, why did Ezra make such a decree? In other words, this whole decree of Ezra is very vague. We don't really have a full understanding of it. In fact, the rabbis in the Mishnah are trying to figure out what's allowed, what's not allowed. Not only that, we don't really know the reason for it. And here, with this Gemara, we've actually come up with one understanding of it, that the decree of Ezra all boils down to, what's the reason? Well, here, at least at this point in the Gemara, it seems to imply that the reason has to do with having awe and fear when you study Torah. And if a person was doing activities that were more, not in the proper, what?
They were more base.
Thank you. More base activities, and they were, not with the proper, not fully awed in fear of heaven, or you're not doing activities that show or that give you that feeling of awe and fear of heaven. So those type of things would prevent a person from learning Torah. And he brought a verse. And these are the two verses that we've been dealing with. So we now have three explanations why it mentions Sinai next to teaching Torah. The first time we mentioned that, we said it's to tell you that a Baal Keri a person who's a Baal Keri, just like you couldn't receive the Torah at Sinai, you can't study Torah. The second thing that we said, we learned from these two, the fact that it says it next to each other, that the teaching Torah is that in Sinai is that when you teach your children Torah, it's as if they received it at Har Sinai themselves, physically. And the third thing that we learned is that when you study Torah, you need to have awe and fear. And if you did something that causes you not to have the full-fledged awe and fear, that would prevent you from studying Torah, and you would need to go to the mikvah. So these are the lessons that we learned from this chapter 4 of Deuteronomy, that it says these two verses next to each other. Now, we did have a number of opinions. So this is the reason. So what's the reason why a Baal Keri would need to go to mikvah? Here it's implying that it has to do with having that right frame of mind before studying Torah. You need to have the right frame of mind. Now, later on, we will see another point. And the other point that we're going to see about the reason of Takanas Ezra is that it has to do with the fact that Ezra's decree was in order that people should not act like chickens, roosters, that they shouldn't constantly be with their spouses. That, of course, it's a mitzvah to be together with one spouse, but if a person is together with their spouse 24/7, that's also not appropriate. As the Rambam says, you need to have a middle path. And so Ezra wanted to make sure that people don't, that at least Talmidei Chachamim, ones that study Torah, they shouldn't be with their wives 24/7. Therefore, or 7 nights a week. So therefore, they should, they would need to have to go to mikvah. And what will that do? It'll cause them to say, you know what? If I'm gonna, oh boy, I have to do that. I'm gonna have to go to mikvah. Okay, forget it. It's not something that we're gonna do every night. And therefore, Ezra was encouraging that people should, have a more of a balanced life. So that's these are the two reasons that we see here. This one reason that we just read now, and the other reason we're going to see a little later. The Gemara gave a few different opinions as to what would be allowed to study. We just heard that Rabbi Yehuda holds derech eretz, which would be like laws of derech eretz would be like Musar Sfar. The law, the Mishnah about there's a tractate called derech eretz, things that are proper ways of acting, and some of the Pirkei Avos, there are certain things in Pirkei Avos that are similar to this, but that would be derech. Not all of Pirkei Avos, but there's certain points that are similar in the tractate derech eretz, similar to like a person is born where you come from, where you're going to go to, things of that sort would be included. And this is Rabbi Yehuda ben Maseira's opinion that would Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that would be allowed to study even if a person is a Balkari. Now the other opinions were that we had one rabbi said Mishnah but not Gemara. The other one said Gemara, but you can't say as long as you don't say Hashem's names. And then we had an opinion that you shouldn't even enter the well, it was two versions. One is you shouldn't enter medrash, which means you shouldn't be involved in the discussion. You could go in and be quiet. Or the other opinion is don't even enter the base medrash. So we had these different views of what would be allowed. Now, the Gemara that we concluded was a story. We concluded the Gemara with a story, and the story was Rabbi Yehuda himself. What did he do? Did he study derech eretz without going to mikvah? So his students asked him. They said, "Teach us a chapter of derech eretz, laws of derech eretz, laws of proper etiquette." And Rabbi Yehuda, what did he do? Is walking right near a mikvah, and right near a nahar, a river, and he went and he dunked in the river, and then he taught them the laws of derech eretz. They said, "What do you do the mikvah for? What do you need to do that for? You could have just taught us. You taught us that you told us that this is allowed." And Rabbi Yehuda said, "Yeah, that's the halacha, but for myself, I am machmir. I'm extra strict for myself, even though according to halacha, I hold that it's 100% permissible. But for myself, I'm machmir on myself to go beyond the letter of the law, and I go to mikveh even to study laws of derech eretz." So that's the Gemara that we learned yesterday. Any questions? Okay, so I'm assuming it's very clear to everyone. Or are people shy?
It's still unclear, but I do have a question, Rabbi. Does
Yes.
the Torah teach that it's okay for a man and a wife to enjoy each other, or it's only for procreation?
So the idea is that even after people can't have children, or even after a woman is pregnant, they still have a mitzvah to be together. So
it's okay for them to enjoy each other.
That's correct.
Okay.
as long as it's permissible and, she's not menstruating and so on. Right. And the proper day, certain days are prohibited and things like that. Right. But other than that, if everything, then it's a mitzvah for them to be together, and but not every night.
What did you just say? Not everyone?
Not every night.
Oh, I see. No, that's too much anyway. Okay.
So the Gemara that we are going to begin is on the second wide line on page 22a. Tanya Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira haya oim. We learned in a brisa that Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira used to say, Ein divrei Torah mekablen tuma. Words of Torah do not become tameh. So if you study Torah, you are not doing anything wrong, even if you are tameh yourself with keri. Words of Torah do not become tameh when you study them. And what that means to say is that a person does not need to go to the mikveh if they have keri. They would still be allowed to study Torah. This is in a certain sense, it seems like he's arguing on the entire understanding that we've been talking about in the last few days. Because here Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira now tells us, guess what? No, there's no limits. You can study Torah. You have no problem. So what does Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira do with the Takonas Ezra, with Ezra's decree? But let me finish up Rabbi Yehuda's statement, and then we'll talk about that. So Rabbi Yehuda says, words of Torah do not become tameh. There's a story of a student that was, the way Rashi learns it, he was rushing through, studying very fast. Another way of translating is it would be that he was like stuttering when he was learning. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira told him, he said, "B'ni psach picha, open your mouth, learn it properly. V'ya'iru dvarecha, let your words shine. She'ein divrei Torah mekablen tuma, words of Torah do not receive tuma. Shenemar, as it says, haloi koi dvarai ko'esh. Behold, these are the words, my words, they're like fire. Nu'um Hashem, says Hashem. And so why does Hashem say that the Torah is like fire? Ma'esh einai mekabel tuma, just like the fire does not receive tuma. Fire can't become tameh. Also, after Torah einan mekablen tuma, also words of Torah do not become tameh. So this is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, that he's explaining that there is no Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is saying that there's no problem with studying Torah, even if a person is a Baal Keri, and he brings a proof, which is obviously an asmachta. It's probably it's not a full-fledged source in the Torah, but he's leaning his drasha on this. It's hinted to in the Torah. What is the hint? That it says that the Torah is like fire. And if Torah is like fire, that means that the Torah is not bekabel tuma, does not become tameh, and therefore, if it doesn't become tameh, it's fine for a Baal Keri to study. Just like fire doesn't become tameh, Torah doesn't become tameh, and therefore it would be fine to study Torah. Okay, so I mentioned to you that we have a little problem here, and that is, what about everything that we've been studying for the last few days that we said that there's a big problem of a Balkari? We even have a Mishnah. The Mishnah says a Balkari can't say certain words of prayer. And all of a sudden, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira drops a bomb over here, and he says, guess what, guys? You study Torah, no problem. It's fine if you study Torah. So Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira is somehow dropping this takana of Ezra, this decree of Ezra. Now, how could he do that? So there are different ways of explaining it. Either Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira argues and says it wasn't a takana, he didn't really make this decree, or in the decree, within the decree itself that Ezra made, he put in it a certain sentence that allows another Bezdin later to drop it. What would that be called in legal terms, Isaac? If you include some statement in the contract that will allow someone later to anyway, whatever.
You grandfather it in.
Okay.
I don't know, an escape clause or something.
What did you say? What was the word?
An escape clause.
An escape clause. Thank you.
You have an out.
Right. So there's an escape clause that allows for a future rabbi to drop this whole decree, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira dropped it. He said it's fine, or he says the rabbis before him dropped it. Somehow there's no obligation to go to mikvah for a Balkari, according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and it's dropped. It's either because Ezra himself put in this escape clause within the decree itself, or there's another explanation that Ezra made this decree, but people didn't accept it. It didn't spread out to the whole Jewish people. And in such a situation, if people don't take it on, then it doesn't have with it the full force, and other rabbis are allowed to be mevatel it. They can abolish it. So that's another explanation. And then there's a fourth explanation, and that is that if the community can't handle it, if the rabbis see that this community can't handle it, then it's also they're allowed to abolish it. So either it wasn't accepted amongst the Jewish people, or the Jewish people couldn't handle it, or within it there was this escape clause. Basically, it is permissible for a rabbi to abolish this decree, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira says it was abolished. And he brings a source in the a source which is sort of like a reason why he felt that in the Torah there's a hint to that it shouldn't be a problem, and that is because Torah can't really become tameh. Even if a person studying it is tameh, the Torah doesn't become tameh, doesn't become impure. So that is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira, and this is it's a very interesting point that we have here, because what ends up happening is that it seems from the Gemara, maybe we'll see more about it later, that there's no problem. Carry, you don't have to go to mikveh anymore. That's what it's going to seem like. However, Tosfos, interestingly enough, Tosfos says on the next page, he says that some say that only for Torah it's not a problem, but for davening you need to go to mikveh. So on the commentary of the Gemara, you already see that there is a sort of room for being machmir, for being more strict, that maybe a person should go to mikvah if they are balkari. And then on top of that, you have a Hasidic idea of going to mikvah before davening every day. And that would be like extra above and beyond, because that's obviously people are not balkaris every day, we hope. And to go to mikvah every day, it's quite an act of purity before davening. Yes, Ezra.
Here, are they translating or thinking that the term megamgim is that he's sort of mumbling it to himself and not saying it out loud because of what we were discussing previously about the Balkari, etc., and then comes along and Yehuda ben Betela says to him, open your mouth and speak, because the words of Torah do not take in Tuma, and so therefore by saying the words, doesn't matter what your state is, you can speak the words of Torah. Is that what they're saying?
Yeah. In other words, it seemed like he was being machmir to be megamgem because he felt he's a balkari. He shouldn't really be studying Torah the regular way. So he was trying to, just like rush through it, or the two opinions of what it was. Like mumbling would be like, I said stuttering, but I guess mumbling would probably be more correct. But Rashi on side 2, on the next page, Rashi translates megamgem bimerutza. So Rashi translates it mean to rush through. Rabbeinu Yoina translates it to mean that he was more like the mumbling shot. So, but basically, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira tells him, "What are you doing? Why are you reciting it this way? You could say it normally. You don't have to go to mikvah. Balkari is allowed to study Torah regularly." Okay, now we're going to also
one more. Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
So what you're really saying is that the Jewish people were not able to go and do all the purification. It was too difficult for them.
So let me stop you right there. When it comes to biblical obligations, there's no leeway. When it comes to rabbinic obligations, rabbinic decrees, the rabbis cannot make a decree if it's too hard for the congregation.
Okay.
The rabbis can't make such a decree.
Okay.
So that's why the conservative and reform don't like the Orthodox, because we proved that we could do all the decrees.
Right.
They don't like that.
I understand. Okay.
But the point is,
right,
that the rabbis can't make such a decree if the community can't handle it, or additionally, there's such a thing if a decree was never accepted, no one really took it on as well. Right. That would be, these are areas where rabbis have the ability to abolish an earlier decree. Normally, rabbis cannot abolish an earlier decree unless they're much greater than the previous court and they're bigger than a bigger group and so on. And so normally it's very hard to abolish any earlier decrees. But there are certain scenarios, this would be one of them, where you have Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira and our Gemara saying that it was abolished. And the question is, what was the exact specific mechanism through which they felt they were allowed to abolish it? What was the specific reason here? And that you have a few different explanations of what